awaited inquiry into the fitness of South Gauteng suspended Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Andrew Chauke, is expected to start tomorrow, putting the embattled National Prosecuting Authority in the spotlight. This follows serious allegations of misconduct and political interference in high-profile cases. The stakes are high, not just for Chauke, but for the credibility of the entire justice system. The first testimony is scheduled for Tuesday, with the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Shamila Batohi, taking the stand. Let's analyze the legal framework and the critical inquiry, the specific allegations that could end Chauke's career. To help us do that, we're joined by News 24 senior legal journalist Karyn Maughan. Karyn, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining. We really do appreciate it. Before we get to what happens on Tuesday, let's take a step back. What exactly is Chauke accused of doing? Of having done, rather? Well,
essentially what happened in August 2023 was that Shamila Batohi sent Andrew Chauke a letter saying that she intended to ask Cyril Ramaphosa to suspend him pending the outcome of an inquiry. And that inquiry really centers on two things: his conduct in relation to the Cato Manor prosecution, the racketeering prosecution against Johan Boysen and his various members of his police unit, the Cato Manor police unit, and his involvement in that. And secondly, his decision not to pursue a murder prosecution against crime intelligence head Richard Mdluli, who we know is a figure who was subsequently, of course, convicted of kidnapping and assault in relation to his love rival Opal Rabakibe's death, which occurred several decades ago. But, you know, obviously a murder case was never pursued, and he's facing questions as to why that he made those particular set of decisions in relation to that case.
Yeah. Now, he was, Shamila Batohi, Advocate Shamila Batohi, the National Director, had written this letter to the President in August of 2023. Chauke only got suspended this year. Has the presidency ever offered an answer as to why it took so long?
Well, I have spoken to the Justice Minister in regard to that, and she had said that essentially what she described, without any real detail, Oliver, as an information issue, that the presidency had asked for certain information which then was not provided to it as a basis for why that decision was not taken. But of course, we know that Chauke himself has come out, even in the aftermath of being his suspension, and said, you know, it took over a month, I think at one stage 45 days when he spoke to me, for them to actually, you know, come forward with the charges. And it was only after media reporting on that issue that the charges were eventually made available through those terms of reference. So there are going to be obvious questions raised about why there was this over two-year delay in this process taking place, especially in circumstances, Oliver, where the allegations against him, you know, center in events that took place, you know, certainly in relation to the Cato Manor unit, you know, 2014, I think, was when all of these events played out. And so those question marks are going to hang over all of that, all of this.
Yeah, no, certainly it will. Let's then talk about what is to unfold on Tuesday. Advocate Shamila Batohi will be appearing first. In fact, she had appeared before the ad hoc committee, and I'm not sure if that added any texture to you around the circumstances, environment that this plays out in. But what is she expected to be doing before the inquiry? Is she expected to build the case for his permanent removal?
Well, Oliver, obviously she played a very important part in this, because she is the person ultimately who made the decision that there was indeed grounds to ask Ramaphosa to institute this suspension and inquiry. We, of course, know that under the NPA Act, you know, you cannot get rid of a Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions or an NDPP or senior prosecutions officials without the president, you know, instituting a public inquiry into the allegations against them. And that is essentially what happened. Now, Batoy is the person who ultimately made the call on, you know, this inquiry into Chauke being asked for by her office, by the NPA, and she will have to justify the circumstances under which she did so, and of course face what promises to be quite intense cross-examination from Andrew Chauke's lawyers. So I think, as you rightly mentioned, the environment, the question marks that are around the NPA at the moment, not just because of, the overtly politicized prosecutions that occurred in the past, under the so-called state capture era, but again, because of the allegations that they're facing in the ad hoc inquiry and in the Madlanga Commission in relation to the prosecution of crime intelligence officials, this is something that is going to be a highly politicized, highly charged session that is going to be watched in parallel to all these other inquiries by the public, and as you rightly point out, has profound implications for the credibility of the NPA.
Yeah. Let's then talk about what this process means in relation to other processes. It's not a criminal case because it's not in the court. This is effectively an internal disciplinary hearing process, right? But it could well build the case for criminal charges to be pursued against Chauke. What is the legal threshold and a minimum level that needs to be met here for him to be deemed unfit to hold office?
Well, it would be things like, has there been overt dishonesty? Were decisions made with a politicized agenda in the absence of evidence? Now, of course, we know in the Cato Manor prosecution, for example, the allegation there remarkably was that these police officers who were accused of involvement in, I think it was something like 28 suspects during their tenure at the Cato Manor unit, were essentially accused of being part of a racketeering enterprise. That's a very serious charge, carries 25 years in jail sentence, because they were alleged to, on the version of Nonkobo Jiba, of course, who ultimately made the decision to pursue these prosecuting charges, and of course, Sean Abrams, as I understand it, to have been part of this enterprise because they were committing these killings in order to secure remuneration or awards from the police, which I think were in the region of about 10,000 rand. And when Rodney de Kock interrogated that thinking, of course, because he did a report on this, he said that's absolutely bizarre. How would you make the case that a criminal enterprise was being pursued with so many deaths, so many murders, so that police officers could secure a 10,000 rand reward? It absolutely makes no sense. So in that context, Chauke will have to, face, kind of questions about why would you have involved yourself in the Cato Manor prosecution and the decisions that were made about it in circumstances where you were the Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions for Johannesburg, not KwaZulu-Natal, which is when this was taking place. And at any point as an experienced, seasoned prosecutor, did you look at this and think, this isn't necessarily justified? Of course, he's making the case and saying, well, I was simply the coordinator. I was just asked to assist, in a very limited role just to make the documents available. I wasn't doing anything in terms of decision making. Racketeering is a decision that must be made by the NDPP or the acting NDPP. I was not involved in that. And it's simply not fair in those circumstances to act as though I was the person who made this decision.
Yeah. Now, of course, we now know at least that there might be some preliminary issues that Chauke wants to deal with, which could be procedurally in their nature. In fact, have it on good authority that he had considered approaching the courts, but had ultimately then decided against that, at least for now. What are some of the procedural hurdles that this process could face?
Well, essentially, there was a very overtly long time that took place before this inquiry was instituted. He has made representations to the prosecuting authority, to President Cyril Ramaphosa, to say, listen, there really isn't a case against me. There is no basis to pursue these charges in the way that they are, and this should not be proceeding. I think it's going to be interesting that he didn't pursue the suspension argument in the High Court, because on a technical level, he did have quite a strong case on the merits of that because of the time that was taken. And of course, in relation to his suspension, Oliver, the allegations that, his knowledge that he was potentially facing an inquiry was given to him over 2 years ago. And to then, in those circumstances, to suspend him now, he might well be making the case that why would you do that? The only issue that really would confront the NPA at this time would be the search for the next National Director of Public Prosecutions, given that Shamila Batohi is leaving office, as I understand it, in January. That's when her term comes to an end. And we haven't seen any moves at this stage from the presidency to find a replacement. And I think there may well be an argument from him, though he has not, to my knowledge, made it at this time, that this entire process was about undermining his opportunity to potentially vie for that position, which certainly he has done in the past.
Yeah, well, I mean, he would have to actually prove it, right, that it was entirely political and not just a pure coincidence. But does this effectively neutralize him from participating in that process at all?
That's the big question. You know, he might well say, well, I haven't been found guilty of anything, and I fundamentally believe that I have a basis to refute the allegations against me. I don't know that legally there is necessarily a bar, but because we don't know what the process of nomination and selection of candidates is at this stage, because the presidency has said, the only thing that they've said is, look, we want to go through the same kind of process that we went through with Shamila Batohi.
An independent expert panel, which might delay the process a little bit further. But we're going to have to leave it there. Karyn, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Senior legal reporter for News 24, Karyn Maughan, joining us there.